Welcome to the Does Anything Matter podcast, where Patrick and Pepin talk about the most age-old question of does anything actually matter?
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Damn Podcast. I'm Patrick, and this is Pepin, and we're we're here to film another episode about Does Anything Matter? You know,
Does anything matter, though? That's the question.
I guess it depends on how you look at it, but we're gonna try and figure it out today. And so there's something that we've talked about before, Nathan and I, and it's sort of an abstract concept, but we're starting to see more of it manifest in reality. So we're going to talk about it today. And what that is what are the implications of artificial intelligence? And
Mm.
and how do we need to adjust our laws to prepare for it? Because it's not science fiction anymore. It's here.
Artificial intelligence is one of those things that it's very difficult to comprehend because, number one, we don't understand the human brain, and a lot of artificial intelligence works through similar mechanisms that the human brain works on, and we don't understand that, so we don't understand artificial intelligence that way. But it's also slightly because it's like if you have a fully developed artificial network, we can kind of look in to see how certain parts of it work. We can understand it to some degree, but it's also kind of like, how does it know which card to select, or how does it know it's going to do this? And I don't know. Like it's trained over millions of iterations. Like there's this AI there from Google called Deep Blue. No, AlphaGo, and it was trained to play Go, and it played a million billion games against itself, and eventually learned how to play it, and then it beat the Go Masters. So how does it know how to do that? I don't know. Just played a lot and eventually got good.
I heard something interesting, and I apologize, I don't remember the source, but and it was essentially saying that the human brain, a lot of our impulses are based on very complex layers of probability. And so, I mean, that in itself kind of creates a whole philosophical question about whether free will exists, but that's a whole nother situation. But if this is true, what it really says is that this is how we learn, is we sort of look at situations that we see and we assign probabilities to them. And we might not be doing this consciously, but our brain is thinking, well, there are certain outcomes that are likely based on my experience. And so our actions tend to kind of go in that direction based on what we've seen. So is it reasonable to say that artificial intelligence is kind of the same?
Yeah, it's a prediction, and it's a prediction reinforcement model or prediction reduction model. So with humans, we make predictions, we make models of the external world, and then we will actually test how well that model actually fares in the external world. And if it doesn't fare very well, typically if you have a good pattern, the behavior will reduce. So let's say that there's some model you have where it's okay to touch hot stoves, and you do that. That model's a bad one. So when you actually touch a hot stove, it burns, and then that decreases the reinforcement of that behavior, and then that behavior becomes less. Let's say there's something that you do, like you go to work and you make money and you live and eat. Well, that will enforce the behavior in a way that will cause it to happen again. Same with computers. Like with these AI algorithms, at least with neural networks, what they'll do is they will say survive, or the ones that do best and make it most, they will get optimized for success, and the ones that don't give that result will say be lessened. So there's that kind of dichotomy there, or that sort of reinforcement and punishment, or punishment's not the word, but essentially it's kind of a sort of evolution in a way.
That's a good word, because I was going to say, if essentially the impulses of the human brain can be attributed to a sort of similar composition as that of, say, the programming of AI, then what makes artificial intelligence so superior to the way that humans learn? And I mean, some would argue it's not now, but as you mentioned, there are some artificial intelligence systems that certainly are, and we're already 90% of the way to seeing self-driving trucks. I mean, one of the only reasons why right now we don't see self-driving trucks being the norm is because we haven't figured out yet how to program them to recognize when road markings are covered up. Like, for example, let's say there's a big snowstorm, and at the current moment, the trucks rely on satellite data and on maps and road signals. So if they can't see the lines on the road, then they can't drive on their own. But when they learn to do that, I mean, they'd certainly be a lot more efficient than humans, right?
Mhm. One way I think of it is that the an AI is going to excel in any area that a human would not, when it is a very calculative, intensive, and very rules based sort of endeavor. So, take chess. Chess is something that an AI can get really good at, especially neural AIs. I mean, there's also programmed AIs, but you can have the AI play against itself, and if it's neural network in, it can get really, really good at chess, like beyond any human player. Good. And then same with like AlphaGo or any other sort of, say, game like that. And it's because essence that game is a mathematical product. Like you can actually describe these games in mathematical ways, and essentially it comes down to a calculation. Who does more calculations first? Who, like with chess, who looks ahead so many moves to realize that this move here will result in loss here. That is kind of the ultimate thing with chess. And there are things which are more generalizable to mathematics, and there's things which are generalizable, or you can say turn them into, say, mathematical problems, but they're very difficult. And much of that issue, and this is actually how a lot of nature plays out as well, is the issue with measurability. So, like when we look out at the world, we see entities and perceptions and everything like this. So, like I see right now, my screen, my camera, my ring light, the walls around me. I see these different objects and entities existing out there, and it seems very natural, very, very easy to do, but it's a very natural thing the human brain does, and what's very good at. When we're out in the woods, we might see like a thing on, we might see like a tree, and then we might go a little bit closer and we might see that the tree has actually like a frog on it that happened to blend in with the tree. But we can pick up these small little details and pick out that frog of the tree, although it's been kind of, evolved to blend in with the surrounding. So we're hyper evolved to kind of look at our surroundings and say detect entity from background and just divide everything into like different parts. It's very hard for a computer to do that. It's not possible. It's possible it can, and it can do it. But like you're saying, like those trucks are having a hard time finding these minute distinctions, and these minute distinctions, the human brain is very, very much evolved to do. But it's not a very mathematical thing because it's kind of like a chaotic thing. Or let's say that there's certain species that blend in with like the forest. That's also kind of hard to detect there too. It's not that there's not algorithms to do it, but it's that general mechanism for kind of separating out, say, visual entities. It's difficult. It exists, but
So
it's hard.
so let's say then, could it be that it's just that AI is not as evolved because it's not as old as humans? Because if really the distinction is that they're mathematically inclined, and the reason for this is that they can recognize patterns, but they can't necessarily discern things like animals who are camouflaged in the woods, right? Who have evolved beyond what the computer knows to be true. So if the frog was one color today and was a different color tomorrow, the computer is trained to recognize the frog one way, but not necessarily the second way unless we tell it to. But there must be an element there. I mean, I'll give you an example. In Asia, there are customer service bots, and these are starting to appear in the United States as well, but not not to the same level. You know, they have bots that actually can tell you where to go in a store to get a certain item, but besides just the logistical things, they also have paths for responses to different emotional stimuli. So that it suggests that we're getting to the point where we can program AI to recognize tone of voice and like facial signatures, things that would cue the AI to understand what the other person is feeling. So if AI becomes capable of recognizing emotion in others, is it possible that it could eventually be more self-aware and be able to recognize the same kind of patterns that you're talking about?
I mean, it's very capable. There's, in my mind, a couple of different questions there. I mean, one is a matter of time. The other is of complexity and actual ability to create it. Because it's like our modern AIs now require like these huge supercomputers. You can talk about AIs that don't require those sort of things, but anything like super complex an AI is doing, it takes a lot of power. And maybe at the end of it, you get some sort of production AI, like you get the creation through say many iterations. But this end product AI is the result of say like months and months of just computation after computation and relearning, and it takes a lot to get there. And where it could happen is number one, we come up with a technology. I have a few ideas about certain technologies that might come to be, but you get these different, say, fine point technologies, and you can start integrating them. So kind of like you're bringing up with the helper AIs. So these AIs might be trained to understand kind of a cognition or not cognition, like human emotion and kind of react to it. So maybe it's not like that great at first, but over time it gets better and better. And maybe that AI is not going to become conscious. But then you take that AI, then you combine it with this, say, cognitive AI, where let's say it helps out doctors, figure out whether they're acting rationally or not. Then you can take this other AI aspect and combine that together. So you take all these modules and you kind of put them together, and you try to create something which is more of a general AI. And so this general AI is made up of different parts, but these different parts can start to interact and kind of communicate in this sort of way where eventually it can actually potentially become conscious or have some sort of self-awareness. And if you think about like the human brain, it's not that far-fetched because the human brain is also segmented in that way. We have the prefrontal cortex, which is mostly a reasoning center, and also that's the sense itself. People will say we have like the hippocampus. You have the memory parts of the brain. I think the hippocampus is the memory part of the brain. You have the fight or flight, emotional side. You have all these different parts of your brain that control different kind of things. And of course, it's not like a just one side, one thing takes all. It's
Yeah.
distributed, but like our brain's not made in this kind of like unanimous sort of way, and you have these disparate parts coming together in a similar way. I think you could have these different neural parts that maybe get good at one thing and bring those together into a full thing, and that thing could be conscious or get
Yeah.
conscious.
Yeah, I mean, people use different parts of their brain more. Each person will use their different parts of their brain more often than others. And so it suggests that yes, there are different paths of intelligence, and there's also a way that they can be put together. There's some composition out there that when you put these different skills or recognitions together, then they start to work cognitively and combine the knowledge. So I do think at some point it's going to happen. And so then the next part of the discussion would really be, okay, so let's say that this happens. What what do we have to do as a society when we now have artificial intelligence that can discern and can have conversation with us, at least to some degree on the same level that we have conversations with each other? I mean, like, for example, what kind of rights does an artificial intelligence body have? Like, say we're talking about some futuristic world years from now where you're on social media, and instead of like typing into a chat box or making a video like we're making here, like we could just put our consciousness into it, and so then it's just a bunch of avatars talking to each other, and we might not even look like our real bodies. I mean, I know that sounds really science fiction, but years and years ago we thought that some of the stuff that's around now would have been science fiction, right? So what would happen in that world?
I mean, there's like six different questions in there, so it's a little bit difficult to land on just one. But one thing I want to point out is this is going to be the more confusing thing with AI if we see continue to approach it. I think there's going to be some regulatory thing that's going to happen eventually, and it's going to try to stop AI from coming into full fruition for whatever reason. I think there's going to be kind of like, not like you're saying, but kind of like alluding to maybe digital rights activists or AI rights activists trying to prevent, say, AI creation, because who are we to play God would be kind of the argument. But even getting into that path there's going to be this uncanny valley where we're going to have these entities that we think might be conscious. We're not sure if they're conscious, and it's really, really hard to tell, what they are, because they might display some symptoms of consciousness, but it's like displaying a symptom could just be a program, right? I mean, what if this AI here is just programmed and it searches through Google and then just starts saying, "Who am I? What am I? Am I real?" Right? I mean, those are very, very normal human questions, and we ask that kind of stuff a lot. And the fact that an AI would take something that humans ask a lot and repeat it, I mean, that's not that big of a deal, right? So, is that the AI is displaying some sort of questioning, some sort of consciousness, or is it this, did this giant search found this question that pops up a million times in humans and just repeated it? So, there's all these instances that you could say, look at where if you aren't subtle about it, you might say perceive it or consider it to be an AI becoming consciousness, but really it's just rudimentary programming, and then it just happens to come up with something that sounds profound, and like it could be questioning its own existence, but really it's just a result of very baseline programming. But then you start getting into these nuanced discussions where maybe it's not as clear as rudimentary programming. It's self-generative, and at that point, you got to look to see it. You can see some of the paths that it gains that self-generation from, and is this self-generative fully? Is it thinking? Is it doing things on its own, or is it becoming something else? Is this becoming more and more, say, conscious? And I'm not going to say more and more human, because like humans aren't the only sort of consciousness. Number one, and number two, it's like humans aren't the standard of consciousness, because if this AI is going to be conscious, it's not going to be conscious in the same way that humans are. But the way we would judge it is it human like as far as its consciousness, as far as its ability to think, and you could go into what would that mean. But I want to get your thoughts on that as far as that uncanny valley and how that would kind of perceive with humanity.
So I think that's a pretty macro way of looking at it, which isn't bad. Um, but I was really thinking of more micro examples. But at first, just to answer your assertion about this macro overview of, okay, what makes how do you determine whether consciousness is real or self-generative, or I'm sorry, I can't say that word,
It's cool.
self-generating. So how we determine that, I'm not sure if it's our place to determine it, right? Because if you believe in evolution, then humans evolved at some point, right? So who's to suggest that AI is not evolving? So we could attribute it as self-generated information that maybe they recognize a pattern. So many humans asked a certain question. So if we want to be human, we should ask this question. So if let's say that AI is evolving, then maybe the AI is not even aware of this evolution. They just know that they're becoming more self-aware. And in doing this, they're recognizing patterns that are closer to human behavior rather than programmed instances, right? So when they start asking these questions, it might not be because they understand that they're becoming human, but because they're evolving. So I would say that it would be rather hard to determine the difference. But I would also say that in an increasingly digital world, I'm not sure it would matter, because if we're talking about our interactions with other perceived human beings, then there ought to be, and I use that word intentionally, there ought to be some type of guidelines that we can use to sort of write laws and determine how we should interact in a space where the entity that we're talking to may or may not be human.
So that's the thing there, because you're saying it shouldn't matter, but or why does it matter? But the question is, it matters because of the ethics involved, right? Because if you're not certain if you're enslaving an entity, you know, like you might disagree with this because you are vegetarian, But I'm okay with the fact that we have cows and pigs, and we use livestock, chickens, and everything because they are. I'm gonna maybe be very blunt here. Lesser beings, like they have consciousness, they have pain, and they have these aspects, but they're not fully human. They're not human like us, and to me, there's that difference. And I'm okay having computers subjugated to my will because that's all they are. They're just programming. Now, I do admit that as things start to progress, and you maybe get something which is a conscious being that can say, I mean, it might be on a different scale, a different kind of say aspect, but it might be similar to a human conscious. Well, my standard of ethics that delineates say cows from computers is that of say rationality, ability to reason, and so on and so forth. And it's certainly be an issue, say, enslaving, subjugating, or say, I don't know, doing disparaging things to an AI, which is, say, conscious in a similar way that a human is. So that's entirely the question is, especially at this, say, this gray point where you're not certain if it's conscious or not. Do you continue with that path? Do you just stop it, or do you keep it going? I mean, you could continue the evolution going, but then it just brings up more and more ethical questions and questions that are hard to kind of answer.
Yeah, I don't think we could really narrow down the macro yet. It's a little bit too beyond our current comprehension. But let me ask you this. Let's say that there is an AI that does become self aware. What kind of rights does that AI have? Or what responsibility do we have in society? So, like, for example, if I'm an AI and I'm self aware, should I be allowed to marry someone? Whether it may be another AI or maybe a human. Like, should I be allowed to marry? And if so, like, what are the implications of that?
I mean, I would say, yeah, yeah. I mean, if that's it, what the AI wants to do. I mean, this is where it gets a little bit confusing because would an AI even want to get married? Because that's a very like human custom. They might be so like out there, that they're not like in it. Like oh, the silly human custom, kind of like Spock, not Spock, Data from Star Trek. Like
Yeah.
it's aware of humanity and aware of the customs, and maybe it's going to partake, but it's this kind of like very foreign, kind of strange. I mean, it might just go along with it because that's what it's doing. Also, you want to. It's important to see maybe it has some program roots, and we have program roots in ourselves too, because we have program roots for like longevity and connection, and creating mates and or creating children and everything. So we have our impetus as well and kind of act on that. And maybe this AI will somewhat be programmed to say interact and kind of congeal with humans. And maybe that's quite possible that an AI and a human want to get married. Maybe it's somewhat in the AI's programming, but also maybe it's somewhat in the human's programming too. And should that be stopped? I don't think so. I mean, it's whatever.
Yes. I was gonna say, what about the other way around? Like, if a human wants to marry an AI, but we're not certain if the AI is self-aware, does that go back to your subjugation thing, or does it not matter because the AI is a lesser being?
Mm, well, I guess it depends on the state because okay, there's certain places where like one place a girl got married to like a train, and then there's another place where a girl got married to like a car or something. So there's cases where people get married to weird things. So that's already a thing. I suppose someone probably got married to the dog at one point. I'm not sure if that's the case, but definitely to inanimate objects.
So a woman married a train.
Yeah,
So what kind of children would they have? A trolley?
uh, most likely. That's
I've
actually where
never I've
Thomas.
never heard of this. Did this really happen?
Yeah, yeah. Hold on, let me try to pull it up here.
Well,
Woman marries train.
well, okay, so AI can marry, but what about this? What if we start getting into like criminal stuff? Okay? What if a AI commits a crime, but we can't be certain if the AI is self-aware, like you're saying? Like, how do you punish an AI?
So this is where things also get complex because the very idea of punishing an AI is kind of in one way how how self-generative does it need to be? Because where we would assume if you're being responsible is you'd create an AI which has the reinforcement algorithm and also the disenforcement algorithm to a state where it's not going to do anything which would be say harmful to society, or if it does something which is harmful, that it's not going to do it out of like say malintent. Like it's going to think it was doing something good, and then it ends up it was doing something bad. But where it gets confusing is if you have something which is fully self-generative and becomes, say, aware, then essentially it's changing its own programming. And then what it's, say, core directive or it's kind of what it's reinforcing and disenforcing, it might be, say, its own ends, which might be, say, negative to society. And I think if you're if you're gonna treat this in a similar way to humans, if something's doing negative to society, you stop it. Whether that thing is super negative, I think there's a level of scale, right? Because if it's just like creating a couple pop-up blockers or sending you some email spam, okay, that's not that bad of a deal, right? Okay, whatever. If it's killing children, okay, that's a big deal right there. So I think it depends on scale, but I don't think the response would be anything different. But I think the impetus to say kill the AI or stop it, at all costs, is going to be much easier to come to that conclusion as opposed to with say humans. Like,
Yeah, I think I agree with that because it obviously if it was created one way and then it changed its code, like in your example, then yes, it was out of control and then we'd want to stop it. And again, where it's been a man-made program, then we're sort of by default placing it below the value of human life. And so yes, it would be much easier for us to draw that conclusion. And
it's also just a lot easier, and we have a copy of the AI too, so it's kind of like, even if we kill it, is it really dead? We just kind of like more decommission it, like put it in stasis.
I think another interesting thing to think about is the responsibility of the people who are making the AI. When these things are getting more advanced. Just one real life example is with self-driving cars. With the conversation around those is, okay, let's say that these cars start to get more advanced and they get to the point where they really don't need drivers in them for the most part. And, some of them are pretty much there. But somebody has to program its response to various situations. And so, like, let's say that there's a situation where the car has to either crash itself or hit a pedestrian, and there's a driver in the car, or or a passenger in the car. I'm sorry. So then, who decides that programming? Like, who's more important, the pedestrian or the person in the car? So that's a whole other discussion that just blows my mind.
It's a giant ethical thing as well, because that's not just with say AI. So that program or that issue is here right now, and people think that we you know have to ask these questions with just AI, but no, like this is something that we ask each and every day. So like with hospital beds, right? Who's gonna get the hospital beds? Who's gonna live? Who's gonna die? For instance, when I got my appendix out, I mean, I was having these terrible stomach pains and everything, and I go to the hospital. And I'm there for like 3 hours, just waiting in the lobby, and eventually they start rolling me to a bed, and we didn't notice the appendix at the time when I was like in the hospital. I didn't even want to go, but my mom and dad forced me. I was only like 15 or something, but they start rolling me to like one of the rooms, and then an ambulance takes the room, and they roll me back. I'm there for another hour or so, and there was a choice there the hospital was making. And let's say that my appendix was about to kill me, because that does happen if it's not treated for long enough. They would have made a decision that would have resulted in my death based off their logistics, their heuristics. And you could say it's very fuzzy there, so it's kind of hard to know they did their best, so on and so forth. But there's laws and mechanisms that kind of have these real life consequences. In similar way, you can talk about driving. With driving, there we make a choice. We make a choice to off risk, say, speed and convenience for death. Because we could have everyone survive, almost nobody die and crash if we have everyone driving at 5 miles per hour. I mean, that would be terrible. No one wants to do that. But that would save a lot of life. So what's the cost of getting to your place slightly quicker? Well, it's probably how many lives? 100 lives, 1,000 lives, 10,000 lives? Who knows? We have these cost benefits analysis going all the time. And these questions don't escape us, but they become more prominent with AI because someone actually has to put that in the program. And there's something in the law, and it's like, okay, here's another example. There's this whole idea about with universal healthcare about these death rules, and these death rules. I mean, I don't think it's conspiratorial. People try not to pretend like they're there, but they're there. They exist because when it comes down to it, there's got to be a question about who's going to live, who's going to get resources, who's going to do this, because there's only a finite number of things. There has to be rules about this. And these rules maybe are not tasteful to ourselves, but ultimately, if you have a system that needs to run, it's not going to run on magic. It has to run on, decisions, and decisions always have costs, always has benefits. So the fact that an AI has to be programmed in a way to make ethical decisions, it's not a new problem. It's a problem that we're having, but the only reason why the problem is now, say, reaching our consciousness is because we've been ignoring all the solutions we're providing so far, and it's a very clear and definitive sort of solution.
Yeah, I mean, you're right that the problem's already there, but I think there's one sort of static difference between the AI problem and the similar ethical dilemmas that we've been facing for years. And the the issue is that the decision is finite, that it lasts for, as long as that programming is in place. So if you take the example of driving in real life and the same kind of thing, you have to decide, you're the driver of the car and you know that you're going to hit this pedestrian unless you swerve. As a human making that decision, it's an in the moment decision. And it's not very likely that prior to that moment, you decided to do that. It's not like as if at some point in your life you said, if I'm ever in a situation where I'm about to hit someone, I'm going to kill myself instead. I mean, maybe you did, but it's more likely that people haven't predestined those decisions. But as a human, you're going through life with a certain moral code, however you determine that code. And when you face situations that challenge it, you make decisions based on the information available at the time. And it's more a sort of a subjective thing. But with the programming of AI, we have to decide that as a universality. And as we've seen from a couple of the other podcasts that we've done where we've discussed this exact thing, there's a lot of people that disagree with universality of morality. So now all of a sudden you have to write this code where there's one right answer, right? And that's why we can't do it. And that's exactly why, like you're saying, we've never solved these problems like universal health care allocations and things, because people don't have the same opinion about it and probably never will.
Well, so I agree with your point, but I mean, it's like the problem becomes a problem because of you're not solving the problem. You know what I mean? So, for instance, I used to work at a bank, and at that bank, there was this whole thing where you couldn't copy and paste because if you copy and paste the account number, it could cause issues and maybe you transfer money to the wrong account and so on and so forth. So what you would do instead is they told you to write it on a piece of paper instead, and then write from the piece of paper onto the thing. And I get there's some psychological mechanisms there, but all that's really doing is just making untraceable now, right? Because now if you make a mistake, now there's nothing on the computer that shows the mistake you made, and now it just makes it untraceable, right? Right? You
Yeah,
know,
'cause
you
you
know
could still
where that
do the
mistake
same thing.
happened. Is that
Because you could still do the same thing. There's just not a record of you typing the wrong number now.
right? There's something that prevents you from doing the same exact thing. Granted, I actually did that thing. I caught myself, but I did it. I made that mistake, even writing on a piece of paper. Why? Because there's another piece of paper there. You know, things get confusing, things get stupid. So it it's not that we're actually solving a problem. We just makes that problem like disappear as far as our measurement goes. And same with this, like we're not actually making this problem go away by leaving it up to individuals to just trying to pretend like this is not a problem.
I,
Like it's obfuscating the measurement of the problem.
I agree. And if any of our viewers haven't seen it yet, you should really watch our last podcast, which we did about whether values are universal or subjective, because this really applies here. And my argument in that segment was essentially that we needed to come up with some type of universal code, at least that is agreed upon by most people. And this conversation about AI really highlights why. Because if we had a sort of universal hierarchy of importance, then when we're talking about these decisions that eventually will apply to AI decision trees, then there wouldn't be as much ambiguity. And we might actually be able to solve some of these problems. But as long as we continue to view these as subjective topics, we'll never come up with a solution.
I think that's a good perspective there because yeah, the thing is like you're like you said, we're trying to solve a problem. Like we're pretending the problem isn't there, and we criticize someone trying to solve the problem by saying there's no like objective answer to the question. But obviously, we want the problem to be solved, right? We want there to be some solution to it, and maybe we're afraid we're going to be on the brunt of that question. But it doesn't really matter whether we declare a formal solution or don't declare a formal solution. The problem is not going to get solved, or it's not going to be solved in a way that is, say, advantageous to the most amount of people or to people in general. So I think it's definitely best to. I mean, there's some questions you could even morally test, right? Because you could say, let's say in the case of a car hitting a pedestrian or having to swerve, you could say what damage is done to the driver and what damage is done to the pedestrian based off either scenario, right? And you could say that, okay, let's say that out of these statistics, 100 times the driver swerves off and hits something. Let's say the driver is beat up, there's damage done to the car, but they manage to make it out, say 90% of the time, and they're fine. Let's say that they hit the pedestrian dies 95% of the time. 5% they live, or something like that. You could say that this gives us moral credence to say that life is more important than, say, damage, monetary damage, and that it's better for the driver to swerve off than it is to then hit the pedestrian and save their own life, because statistically they're not saving their own life most of the time. So
Exactly. I couldn't say it better myself, to be honest. That's a very utilitarian stance. And essentially, this is all I'm saying is that we don't have to all agree that everything is moral. The morality of it could be, or, whatever values that you use to assess that could be subjective. But when we're talking about how to solve problems which may be in some way tethered to morality, we do need to have some type of objective criteria. And because eventually we're going to have to make these decisions as we enter into this increasing world of AI.
mm, there's one challenge that I heard on some podcasts where it took this kind of driving car example, and I think it was with Tesla. But there's a question, Tesla, the car company, and the idea is that why would a manufacturer make a car that's not going to, say, benefit the user at full cost, at the expense of, say, the victim or the people on the outside, right? If it's between the pedestrian and the car user is always going to want to prefer something that is going to protect the car user because that's what they're paying for. So why would a car user ever pay for something that's not going to do that?
So I say that's an interesting question because it really highlights the differences between when you have a system that's based on capitalism and one that's based on socialism. Now, I'm not trying to get super political here. This is just very, very base level. And just saying that as we get closer and closer to having a world that's dominated by AI, we're going to have to change certain paradigms. Now, whether that means moving to socialism, that's not what I'm suggesting. But I'm saying that if we want to introduce some form of universality, I think that it's going to go a little bit farther than morality. Because you're right, in a capitalist system, there's going to be a lot of emotions because emotions are what sell products. So if a person wants a product that's tailored specifically to them, then a utilitarian principle is not going to apply at least a good portion of the time because that would be what's best for society. It's not always what's best for the individual. And so if we have a strictly majority capitalist system, there will always be a sort of barrier to arriving at these objective best for society solutions. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. One thing that's interesting is even given a capitalist system, you could get things which are, say, universal, because it's not uncommon for businesses to make their own business practices, which are like, so essentially credit card companies and other companies like this. They're very stringent, and they have these crazy rules that kind of try to protect consumers and try to do all these different things. Now, people could talk about other aspects that maybe are not so good, but it's not inconceivable that business might implement practices which, say, are pro consumer, or they're pro ethics. Like they try to do things that are not just in consideration of profit, that they do more than that. I mean, I think capitalist is sometimes a little bit oversimplified in that kind of way. The other thought was the I think easiest way for any sort of a AI manufacturer or AI kind of company to, let's say, in the case of cars, to avoid this issue is to make it not an issue. So an example I have here is like the abortion problem. So I don't know if we've had the abortion debate, but just
No, we haven't.
okay, just give like a quick 2 second take on my opinion. So I think that the more human the thing is, so let's say the baby, fetus, what do you want to call it, the more human it is, the worse it is. The more like it's a cell, the less bad it is. So if an egg gets fertilized at conception, that's it's just like I don't know, a jellyfish. It's nothing. But the further it goes along that process and the more human it becomes, the less and less okay it becomes to abort it or to kind of kill it. And then essentially you get a baby. The baby's not good to kill. So there's this kind of gray area that exists between all right and terrible, right? And you want to ideally between be on the all right side, right? You don't ever want to approach the baby side unless so it's gonna, like, say, cause death to the mother or something to that effect. So one way of solving this abortion issue is we admit there's these two sides, and you just try to avoid this middle here, because this middle, it's really hard to determine. I don't know the months and terms, but let's say you get to a point where it's potentially viable, not quite, but just give it a couple more months, and then it's gonna be a full baby that's gonna be viable. Is it all right then? I don't know. I mean, I can't make that decision. So
See,
a solution to that is just to take out that middle ground. In similar way, with computers and AI technology, especially with say these self-driving cars, you make it so that essentially there's no middle ground, where the cars are so safe and have such algorithm safety mechanisms, and that they have crazy detection, that it never actually has to make that decision. It never comes into that problem of, am I going to hit a pedestrian, or am I going to have to kill myself? Because it's just so good at doing that, and it just avoids that ethical question altogether, just by being so effective and so good.
yeah, I don't think I agree with that actually, or at least I don't agree with that comparison, because when you're talking about the gray area between a fetus and a baby, that's totally different because you're saying that you should acknowledge that there are two opinions and both can be right in certain situations, or that one is completely right and one is completely wrong. But you're saying that you're saying there's two different opinions and it's okay to acknowledge that. But then in the car example, making the car so safe that it never encounters the dilemma, that's like saying just never have sex and you'll never encounter the dilemma, which actually is a legitimate argument for people who are pro-life. They say that if you don't have sex until you're ready to have a baby, then you won't ever have to make the choice, which is absolutely true. So really, that it's not a correct comparison because when let's say that if the car does encounter the situation, you have to have an objective criteria to figure it out. Because it's like people, if you choose to have sex before marriage and you happen to get pregnant, now you're in the situation. So you can't opt out. You can't say, oh, well, actually, come to think of it, I want to wait until marriage to have sex. It's already done. You're in the situation. So now you need a way to evaluate what the best choice is. And you're in the gray area. So eventually, no matter how safe a car is, even if it's like a 0.002%, eventually the car is going to be in the situation. So there has to be programming there where the car decides what to do. And so for that reason, there can't be gray area. There has to be just some type of criteria that we can use that determines what is the best possible outcome when this situation does arise.
So my argument against that is that yes, there would have to be an implementation of a worst case scenario there, but the the ethical question kind of becomes moot because you're dealing with like a one in a million scenario. Because let's say that the AI gets so good at preventing accidents that let's say they can actually look at the data here and say one out of a million accidents happens, and it's not able to prevent, and it has to execute this, worst case scenario code. So you could still say that there's that ethical quandary of what it needs to do, and so on and so forth, but that this is such a rare case that it's very unique, and it's not warrant of, say, a complete ethical scrutiny, because ethics is about generality, and the more general we can make the case, the more we can apply it to other things. But if there's a very, very specific case, then what can kind of abstract from that is very, very difficult. Now, obviously, it seems very clear and cut right here. We have to make a AI that has this one delineation there. But if that delineation never ever comes into play, except for like one in a million cases, then maybe that delineation doesn't really matter that much. And maybe that's a way of scooting around the issue. Again, the issue is still there technically because I'm not going to say it's not there and it has to be implemented in the code somewhere. But the question is, to me, how often does that code get executed? It's kind of same thing with, like, okay, you might not agree with this metaphor here, but there's certain things. Okay, there's certain things in the books probably about, as a martial law, right? When the government can come in and use military force to, say, subjugate the citizens or kind of reclaim certain things, and those laws are on the book. You could see those laws are code for the government to kind of act on, or for the military to act on. And you could say that we're not in the state of martial law. The chances of that happen are super, super small, but that chance is still there. There's still code on the books that would allow that to happen. True, true, but we have to look at where we are right now and whether the ethicality of that is really applicable in that situation.
So you're 100% right that when it comes to something like driving, there's obviously statistical ways that we can improve that because it's a procedural thing. And going back to the beginning of the conversation, as AI becomes more advanced, the procedurals will be much easier and more efficient, in fact, than our human counterparts. So one counterpoint to that would be if everything works perfectly, the chances might be 0.002%. But what happens when we have a cyber terrorist attack and our automatic or our self-driving car system gets hacked? Then we have a whole different situation there. So and then all of a sudden, like, let's say that they're based on satellites, and then we lose our satellite data, and now the cars have all these kinds of decisions that they have to make. They don't know where they're supposed to go. We have to, like, there's always a contingency. Do you know what I mean? So
Mhm.
like the contingency might be rare, and honestly what I'm saying sounds kind of loose because again, this is a reality that we're not even really sure about yet. There might be things that you and I can't imagine are going to happen, but someone has to imagine them and have contingencies for them. And it interests me so much to think about it.
Yeah, yeah. I think we're agreeing, but we're like on, like you're more worried about the contingency, but I'm more worried about the generality, because I think in general things are going to be designed in a way where it's going to avoid those contingencies as much as possible because they don't want to make those decisions. And those decisions will still have to be made, and they're probably going to come into effect a decent bit, especially with the earlier prototypes, because the earlier something is, the more likely it's going to be less refined. But the more something learns and gets, say, better and better, the more anti-fragile it'll be. And like these AIs are going to be doing these incredible things, I think, especially if they're neural network based, because it'll be able to. This is what I imagine. So imagine you have like a general hive mind sort of consciousness, right? You have the safety AI, right? And it looks at the safety data for every car, and you could talk about, say, how these cars are tracking you and everything like that. It's terrible, blah blah blah. But you could look at, say, general driving of any car, in these self-driving cars, and what causes and what leads to, say, accidents. and it can look at each accident and learn why the accident happened, incorporate it into the general data of all cars, and you could have this safety, say, metric and mechanism, which is self-reinforcing, not just on the car-to-car basis, but on like this huge, wide swath basis. And even if the accident happens, it's actually kind of good because now the car knows how not to get into the accident now, or it can learn from that, kind of weight it in. So, like you said, like the possibilities are kind of unimaginable, and like I personally think that if we get to a point, say 50, 100 years from now, car accidents are going to be a thing of the past. I think there's going to be environmental insult and things that do happen. So I don't think it's going to be like completely controllable. I mean, let's say a boulder comes and crashes into a car, or let's say that I don't know something crazy happens and like a car goes off the road, or a bridge breaks, or driver does something stupid, or the car just messes up. That's always a possibility there. But I think in general, car accidents are going to be very, very much lessened. And they could also talk about other accidents too, because we've been focusing on cars here quite a bit and kind of traffic accidents, because I think that's kind of like one of the big things with the ethics. But there's further ethicalities here, such as the ability for AI to control human. So Jordan Peterson, a famous Canadian psychologist, kind of came up with this. I don't think he came up with this, but he illustrates this idea that AI might be able to get so complex and so good at knowing you. Like we have phones on us all the time, and our phones will track our data and kind of make suggestions based off AI. And you could get a phone or a tracker, for instance, that knows that you're thirsty before you're thirsty, right? It can start to know your wants and desires before you know them, and can start to model your consciousness in a way that it can almost predict you and kind of control you in these kind of ways. And if it gets to that point, what does that exactly mean for humanity? Or is humanity kind of being enslaved or being controlled by AI?
Bill Burr, he's a kind of famous comedian. He does a few things on Netflix, and he does a bit about this. It's really funny if you're into sort of off-color humor. But he talks about AI and how actually the biggest threat to AI is going to come from relationships. Because, like you said, they're going to get so advanced that you're not going to need a wife anymore or a
Mm,
husband. They're
mm,
gonna they're gonna be able to make you much happier than another human being ever can. And that's kind of scary because what does that mean for you know continuity of the human race, or just the normal human experience of having relationships? I mean, will eventually everything just be fake?
mm. Yeah. Well, you can imagine this, right? You can imagine, say, we have a sort of like VR experience, right? And maybe it has like some brain scanners to kind of like read out our pleasure centers and everything like this. And the AI just generates stuff that pleases us, and it creates a, I mean, I would see it as like sort of hell, kind of personally in a way, but it's also kind of heaven. Like it's this delusion that it sucks you into, that this really says it's essentially like a drug. All it does is it gets your pleasure centers to maximize and kind of get you in the state of euphoria and this like say bliss, and it keeps you there. And it just let's say it starts pulling you away, it knows exactly what to do to generate the pleasure centers or engagement or whatever you want. So you're essentially stuck in this dream or this fantasy in this alternate life, and it could do that just indefinitely.
That's true. I mean, I'd say some people might say that we're already headed in this direction because with how much time that people spend on their devices, listening to videos, listening to music, playing video games, I mean, I can tell you that I personally am not involved with reality at least 50% of my day.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
I mean, I know we have to wrap up this discussion here, but I think maybe a good way to conclude would be with just a simple question. Uh, do you think, based on everything that we're talking about, that AI is ultimately good for society, or do you think it's going to have negative effects?
I think that's for. I think it's going to be multifaceted. There's going to be implementations which will be good, implementations that will be bad, implementations that will get out of control, implementations that will be underwhelming. I think overall, long term, it will be good, but I also think it's going to create something. It's going to change humanity, and humanity is going to become something different. And I don't think So there was an experimenter, or there, what is this thing? So there was this guy, and I don't know how true this is, but I think it's Elon Musk. That's right. Elon Musk is trying to create this thing called Neuralink. So essentially, he will put like a chip in your brain, and this chip has like a sort of like pseudo neurons, from what I understand, and it kind of expands that part of your brain, and it's meant to try to like say reattach like your recognize vision in other aspects. But you could theoretically kind of take these AI modules and chips and kind of interface them with your brain and actually expand your brain capacity in certain ways. And so I don't think AI is just about, say, the external, but I think it's going to become internal in the way that we can interact with it. And essentially, we're going to, I mean, we already kind of are AI in a way, right? But I think we're going to incorporate the best of AI and kind of incorporate them in our brains in a direct sort of interface. And our brains are just going to, say, we're going to be able to get past certain capabilities. So, like, we can't do math very well. Oh, hey, just put that module in. Hey, we can do math. Hey, we can't do this. We can't do that. We're going to just become the AI ourselves. So, I think that's where we're going.
I think that overall it is a boon for society, but I do think that a couple negative things that will certainly happen. I think we'll definitely see more people commit suicide and become depressed because that's already an effect of social media. And I think that you're correct that we're going to implement AI into ourselves. For example, Bluetooth devices that we can wear that will translate other languages we are hearing into English. So we will be able to interact with other people who speak languages we've never heard and understand completely what they're saying. But we're just always going to have these devices on us, and as time goes on, it's going to be more and more. We're going to be more disconnected from just being human beings, and I think that disconnection is going to cause some amount of bleakness in society. But overall, yes, it is beneficial. And so I don't want to be overly negative. I just think this is something we have to be aware of as humans and maybe try and ration ourselves and remember to step away from the technology for a bit.
Mm, yeah, yeah, yeah. It'll be interesting. I'm excited, but I'm also kind of scared. But who knows where we'll be even tomorrow? So we'll find
Yeah.
out.
Let's just hope they don't conquer us. Anyway, I hope you all liked this episode. Hit the like button if you did, and we'll be back soon with more content.
Awesome. You guys have a great day.